the Nonprofit Podcast, powered by DonorBox. In today's ever-changing nonprofit landscape, the quest to attract and retain donors is more critical than ever. As organizations strive to make a lasting difference in their communities, understanding the evolving preferences and behaviors of different donor demographics is so important. Welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Jenna, Education and Community Engagement Manager here at DonorBox. We are here each week with practical actions you can use today to increase donations and take your nonprofit to the next level tomorrow. And joining us today is Elizabeth Bradley, CEO of ForumOne, a digital agency that amplifies the impact of mission-driven organizations through transformational digital solutions. Elizabeth brings over 15 years of experience in digital communications, the nonprofit sector, and fundraising to craft and implement successful strategic communications projects, campaigns, and organizational strategies. With her wealth of experience and expertise, Elizabeth will shed light on a pressing question facing many nonprofits. Why should they prioritize engaging with Gen Z donors over baby boomers? Welcome, Elizabeth. Happy to have you.
Thanks, Jenna. Really glad to be here.
We are so glad to have you. Now, before we dive into this topic, which I am so excited about, could you share a little bit about your role and the work being done at ForumOne?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am CEO of ForumOne. We're a strategic agency that works with major nonprofits and public sector organizations to implement digital solutions, messaging, and campaigns that advance their mission. So that means we get to work alongside our partners to elevate audience engagement, strengthen digital and customer experiences, champion accessibility and inclusion, and really make communications, development, and technical teams more efficient so that they can keep up with the ever-changing landscape that we're living in. Our clients include the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the March of Dimes, Natural Resources Defense Council, Mercy Corps, ALS Association, and many more spanning education, healthcare, international development, culture, the environment, and advocacy.
That is quite the roster. And it's so clear that you've definitely got such a pulse on this sector, right? So I'm so excited for this conversation today. And I think that there's a bit of this buzzing around on LinkedIn and all these digital spaces at conferences. And I feel like Gen Zs are kind of this mysterious generation. As nonprofits are navigating this landscape of donor demographics, why do you think that it's so important for them to prioritize engaging with Gen Z donors over baby boomers?
Yeah. So, I think one thing that's really important to remember as we approach this conversation is we do tend to think of Gen Z as younger, as maybe still babies, but currently there are as many Gen Zers in the workforce as there are baby boomers, and they'll actually overtake baby boomers in the workforce in 2024. So it is really important that we just look at the data on this. Those trends are changing, and they're making up more and more of the workforce, more and more of the donating population. But millennials and Gen Xers still make up the bulk of the workforce. And these four groups alone have such differing experiences that if you try to use messaging that will speak to all of them in one go, you fall into that trap of kind of, if you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one. One data point I think is really interesting here is just thinking about kind of the experience of Gen Z coming into the workforce and growing up and the experience that they have had with institutions that older generations really have a lot of trust in is so vastly different. They have entered the workforce during housing crises and financial crises, and they really just have a different level of trust with institutions than we see in older generations. And that shows up really clearly in engagement data with, especially with larger nonprofits. And so it's important to be aware of those factors as you're thinking about messaging, so that you can really meet them where they are and talk to them in ways that are going to build that trust, knowing that you might have an uphill battle going in.
If you're talking to everyone, you're not talking to anyone. We say that all the time here as well. So you're talking about these data points, these insights that organizations can really look at to see how those trends are going to affect their donations and what that can look like. So first question for you is, where can nonprofits look at this important data? Where can they go to be on the up and up as things are changing and as preferences are evolving for these different generations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the first thing is to look at your existing channels. So every system that we work in gives us such a wealth of data, whether it's social media or email or your website, you likely already have so much information. And so that's a great place to start. But it is really important that you figure out what questions you're trying to answer before you dive into that data. It's really easy to get kind of overwhelmed with the outputs that these modern systems have. So making sure that you understand what you are trying to get out of that data, what questions you're trying to answer is so key. And then really looking for trends over time. So trying to not focus too much on benchmarking against other organizations, because there's so many variables that come into play when you start to look at other groups and what they're doing. But really looking at kind of improving over time, beating what you did last month, making sure that you're kind of moving towards the goals that you've set for yourself, rather than looking externally at competitors or comparators.
Many of our listeners may not have a lot of data to go off of. We have some startups, emerging organizations that may not have enough of that data to see statistically relevant trends, right? So what would you recommend for them as they're, just trying to get as much as they can out of what they've got?
Yeah. There, I would say go to publicly available data. There's an incredible amount you can find out from Google Search Console, and to really understand how people are asking questions digitally, what topics they're interested in, and how those might relate to what you're trying to say. So I think looking at public data is a great place to start. I'd also really encourage testing. So run some A/B tests. If you have a question that you're trying to answer, you don't necessarily need to look at a huge amount of data to start to understand what performs better than something else. So, send out a couple of email blasts with slightly different heading or, different calls to action, and see what performs better with your target audience. You can learn a lot really quickly.
So now they're looking at this data. They need to develop a strategy based off of this. What do you think those are to effectively engage? We're talking about Gen Z, engage that Gen Z donor, but still maintain connections with their older generations, right? Because you don't want to be out of touch.
Yeah, absolutely. So the data and the feedback shows really clearly that Gen Z craves social impact stories, and they absolutely want mobile giving options. And those mobile giving options need to work seamlessly. It needs to work as well as Amazon. That UX is really, really important to make sure that they're not hitting snags. But older generations might still respond better to traditional channels or to kind of more formal impact reports versus social impact storytelling. And they are more likely to give on desktop, or even direct mail options are still effective with some older generations to donate. So having that multi-channel approach is really, really important in fostering connection and increasing engagement across all ages. And back to our previous conversation, it really does need to be data-driven to understand where you're reaching your different audiences, and whether that mission is resonating or not. So you really can't just depend on that industry-wide data. You've got to be looking specifically at your own and leaning in on that focus on analyzing donor history to segment audiences based on their preferred communication methods. So we can generalize all we want, and we do know from the data that Gen Z really does show up more on social media and those platforms. But you also need to validate that and make sure that that's true of your particular audiences that you're trying to reach.
So just understanding their values, their preferences, their communication channels. And that goes for all donors of all ages. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I want to dive deeper into reaching that younger generation. I would love, I'm going to put you on the spot again, if you could provide some examples of some successful approaches that you've seen from nonprofits that you've worked with that have engage this Gen Z donor really well, right? You talked about impact stories, a good user experience. I think we all expected this point, right? What have you seen that works really well?
Yeah. So when we talk about Gen Z, we're talking about people ages 12 to 27. And obviously, a 12-year-old and a 27-year-old are living vastly different lives. But when we think specifically about donations, there's really a lot of long-term opportunity to be helpful and establish an organization as a leader before you get to that financial ask, especially with the younger end of that spectrum when you're looking at, the 12 to 20-year-olds before they enter the workforce. So we work with the climate organization NRDC. And in our research, we found that 1 in 5 visitors to their websites were actually high school and college students coming for a class presentation or a school paper. Those users were far more diverse than the people visiting for any other reason. And building a diverse supporter base was a really high priority for NRDC. So we worked with them to think through, how do we ensure that that younger Gen Z generation is getting the information that they need? So we're building those relationships with them early and getting them to come back and develop that long-term relationship. Those visitors are a really big opportunity for NRDC to shape and inform their views on client and the environment, and then have that positive association with the organization to increase the likelihood of their becoming supporters in the future. Now, thinking about the 22 to 27-year-olds, once they're in the workforce, probably more likely to donate, we've found that leading with a financial ask is often unsuccessful. They're really looking for in-person opportunities to take action in their community. They want that localized impact before the financial commitment. So if an organization can make that possible and connect them to local opportunities for action, that's how you can get that group to financially support you. And that's a great example of something that can feel like one-to-one personalization, even if it's just geographic personalization. If you're just geolocating based on, where their cell phone is, it can still feel really, really tailored and personalized. And that's really just thinking about kind of what that person needs or values and providing that before you ask them for a donation to continue the work or service that they value.
So learning and educational opportunities, I don't know about you, but I Google probably 20 million things a day, and I land on all sorts of websites to get my information. So that actually, when you had said that at first, I was surprised, but then it made a lot of sense. And then creating these opportunities to really serve, I think that this generation wants to see and feel the impact that they can have, right? It's like this new generation of advocates that are really boots on the ground and really keen to sink their teeth in. What else? What else can organizations glean from these types of interactions that Gen Zs are looking for, whether that's through their website or their email communications, how they should be communicating on social? What does that look like to you?
Yeah. Well, I think a big takeaway here is that your website is probably not the most important thing, and neither is email. It really is all about social media. That has increasingly become a storytelling platform in its own right. So the kind of the old model of finding people on social and getting them to come to your website to tell a story, to learn more about the organization, more and more of that is moving on to different platforms. And those platforms can really vary a lot depending on the community that you're trying to reach. So, of course, TikTok is huge with Gen Z, but so are Discord and Reddit and some of these closed, more tailored communities where the audiences might be smaller, but they're much more focused and there's an opportunity to really connect directly to them. And a lot of engagement is happening on those platforms. Increasingly, donations can also be made on those platforms, although there's pros and cons to that. And I think most organizations do see more success getting folks to come back to the website to actually make a donation. But there is so much more of the donor journey that is happening fully on social. And I think organizations really need to lean into that and figure out how to optimize that rather than trying to force people always to come back to their own properties.
So thinking about all these other platforms, you said Reddit and Discord, and these seem like very trendy things to me, but they've been around for a while. Looking ahead, what trends do you foresee shaping the future of nonprofit marketing and donor engagement, particularly in relation to reaching and engaging those younger generations of donors?
I think that really fostering authentic connections with Gen Z is going to continue to be the focus. And there will be trends in what platform that's on or exactly what that looks like, but it is going to continue to trend towards genuine connections. It's so incredibly noisy out there. And if you want to stand out to a young person, you really have to make them feel like they're a part of your mission. And you need to find the way to that emotional connection in a way that's realistic and attractive to them. Some of the trends that I see kind of furthering that within that, I think video is a really effective way to do that. The compelling video stories and influencer marketing are really going to continue to resonate with Gen Z's desire for social impact and transparency. And I think especially as we see the advent of AI-generated content, video is a way to increase that trust and increase that direct communication. We're also expecting a rise in microphilanthropy or in smaller recurring donations. We already see that favored by Gen Z, and I think that will continue to be a strong trend. Mobile-friendly platforms, gamified giving experiences, that type of experience will become really crucial. And then lastly, I think that community building aspect, a sense of belonging is increasingly crucial. And we see Gen Z gravitating more and more towards closed platforms or smaller platforms. So communities that are focused on one specific thing. So it might be about a platform. It might not be about the platform. It might be just about the community that is built there. But really, the key here is seeing where your audience is and helping foster that community, not trying to just tap into it and kind of extract value, but really being a part of community building alongside Gen Z.
And how can organizations stay agile and responsive to evolving donor preferences and behaviors? It's ever changing. The sector is forever keeping us on our toes. So how do we hold ourselves accountable and make sure that we are responding to these types of trends that may be coming up?
Well, I think the first thing I would focus on is really embracing experimentation. The landscape is so dynamic. Trends change so fast. We've really got to just try things and be curious and test new technologies, test new tones, test new approaches, see what works and see what doesn't, and keep the stuff that's working and let go of the rest. You've kind of got to always be on the search for the best ways to personalize the giving experience, the best ways to reach your audience where they are. I think another thing that's key is embracing the omni-channel presence. You've got to be where Gen Z is, and that is likely not on your website. So social media platforms right now, TikTok and Twitch are great. But in a couple of years, it might be something else. And we've got to have the flexibility to show up where the audience is, while maintaining those strong email and direct mail strategies for older donors. And then I'm probably going to sound like a broken record here, but data. All of the information that you need is there in your data, and you really need to understand it to tailor that messaging and engagement strategies to your specific donor segments across generations. This one isn't Gen Z specific, but this is just so important in making sure that we're tailoring those strategies to whoever we're trying to talk to.
For folks who are listening, they may feel intimidated by this, right? Like, oh, I mostly only have baby boomers donating, or millennials, or I don't even know what generation is donating to my organization. What is the first step they can take to tailoring their communications to the specific generations and segments of their donor base?
I think the first step is listening. And you can either do that by being a part of communities where your donors are and hearing what they're talking about, hearing what they say they care about, or you can do that in more formal ways and actually, survey and ask them, what is it that is important to you about this cause or this work? How do you like to be communicated with? What is most interesting to you? I think it's really important to meet those donors with information that is valuable to them, well before you ask them to do anything. Before you ask them to sign up for your email list, ask them to give $5. You've really got to provide value and show value. And that starts by listening.
Well, you have given us a lot to think about. If folks want to dive in deeper and learn more, where can they do so?
They can do that on our website, ForumOne.com. We've got great resources and insights there. And also on social media. LinkedIn is the big channel for us. So we publish lots and lots of insights, toolkits. We host monthly webinars, and would love to invite y'all to be part of the conversation.
Amazing. We'll be sure to link those in the show notes for everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
And thank you for joining us on the Nonprofit Podcast. I hope you've left with the confidence to take a small step today that will make a big difference tomorrow. Be sure to click the download button on your podcast player, then leave the Nonprofit Podcast a review, or give it a thumbs up if you're listening to the Nonprofit Podcast on YouTube. Your review is a great way to help others find us. You're here to help others. We're here to help you. Until next time, stay inspired.
That warm feeling when you help someone, it's not just happiness, it's fulfillment. And we believe it should be available to everyone, from frontline heroes to first-time fundraisers. Our tools empower you to help others. This is our mission. This is DonorBox, helping you help others.